It's 7 o'clock. This is Sky News Tonight, our top story. A week ago, we hadn't heard of Omicron, but now it's spreading rapidly. We'll have a special panel of experts to answer your questions. Sky News is inside the lab studying the new variant. Scientists warn it could be causing a rise in reinfections.
And once they've grown the virus up to sufficient quantities, they'll have enough virus to be able to split it up and do these experiments. The first one really they want to do is to establish, is it going to be resistant to the vaccine?
Germany clamps down on the unvaccinated, banning them from shops and bars. Angela Merkel says a vaccine mandate could be imposed from February. Boris Johnson insists Christmas events should not be cancelled as he gets his COVID booster jab. Coming up, we'll have a special report on the front line in A&E as medics battle to treat the massive backlog of NHS patients. Also tonight, starved, tortured and killed by his father and stepmother, the 6-year-old who died at the hands of those who should have cared for him. Still being kept in the dark, thousands of people are without power following damage caused by Storm Arwen. And the Duchess of Sussex wins her legal battle against the Mail on Sunday, calling it a victory for anyone who's ever felt scared to stand up for what's right. Hello there, a very good evening. Now, do you go to the Christmas party or have a big family get-together? The answer may very well depend on just how serious the Omicron variant is. We don't yet know if the surge in cases in South Africa will lead to a surge in hospital admissions and what impact it will have around the world. Throughout the day, we've been getting your questions about the new variant, which we'll do our best to answer in a moment. But first, Sky News has gained rare access to the Scottish laboratory looking at the new COVID variant, which is causing concern in the UK and worldwide. Scientists at the facility in Glasgow are on the front line of the race to learn more about the strain, especially how existing vaccines will perform against it. While the government insists that getting a COVID booster remains the best defence, and the Prime Minister received his this afternoon. Sky Science and Technology editor Tom Clark has this from the University of Glasgow's Centre for Virus Research.
This box contains a precious but dangerous cargo.
This is the Omicron sample. Thank you.
Scientists here believe it's the first live sample of the Omicron variant they've been able to obtain. Their first chance to confirm in the lab whether the new variant is as worrying as it currently looks to the world outside.
We don't know yet what the collection or the constellation of changes that we're seeing in this new variant mean. But we will be able to test that now by taking it into the laboratory.
This high-level containment lab at the Centre for Virus Research in Glasgow is one of the few in the UK equipped to handle pathogens like this. It's only once it's inside that the sample can be carefully unpacked. They've been preparing for this moment since news of Omicron first emerged.
We can start straight away to put the virus in culture in order to plan further experiments later. Because that's very important, and this is the kind of answer we need, and we need scientific data before claiming anything about how this variant will behave.
So this is an important moment. Only getting their hands on a live sample for the virus will allow these scientists to start addressing those urgent questions about the Omicron variant. Can it evade our vaccines? Will it be more infectious than previous variants? Does it cause more severe disease? This lab, like others around the world, has become expert at infecting human cells with different variants of COVID-19 to assess their unique dangers.
So on the right, we have cells that are uninfected and healthy. And on the left, we have cells that we've infected with SARS-CoV-2.
But with reports coming from South Africa of possible infections of Omicron in people previously infected with other COVID strains, the focus has to be on whether it can avoid our antibodies.
The most pressing is to be able to understand what is the level, the degree that this Omicron can escape the immunity elicited by vaccines. So you can compare, for example, Delta versus Omicron and see how the antibodies present in the vaccinated individual can neutralize the virus.
However, lab tests can only tell us so much. The view among these researchers is that in the weeks it'll take them to get results, it's best to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Tom Clark, Sky News, Glasgow.
Well, our science correspondent Thomas Moore joins me now. We know research being done right around the world on Omicron, Thomas, and I believe in the last few minutes some details coming out of South Africa.
Yes, indeed. Some of the most important research on Omicron will come from South Africa because that's where they have the most cases. That's where they can do epidemiological studies. And some of the first evidence is slightly worrying because they've found that there is a substantial risk of what they call immune evasion with this new variant. That means that they can get round the antibodies that we would have from a previous infection, for example. They found that the reinfection rate was more than twice as high as it was in the first wave of COVID, the original Wuhan strain. So that is a concern because even though in South Africa they do have substantial levels of immunity antibodies from all the waves they've had down there, people are still highly likely to get reinfected. And that seems to be what is driving this surge of cases in South Africa. Now, earlier on, Professor Anne von Guttenberg from the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, who did the study, she also said that although people are getting reinfected, when they are, the symptoms tend to be mild. Now, that is good news, she said, and she believes that would hold true of the vaccine too. Now, you've got to remember that South Africa has a slightly different picture to the UK. They've only got 24% of people vaccinated there compared to our very high rates. And it's possible that the vaccine will give better protection against a variant than natural infection. So although we should look very carefully at what's happening there, I don't think we can necessarily conclude that everything that happens there would happen here.
OK, Thomas, thank you for the moment. Well, Angela Merkel says unvaccinated people in Germany could be barred from non-essential businesses if the latest wave of COVID infections isn't broken. The Chancellor says it could come into effect in February. Let's speak to our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, who's in Brussels for us. So, Adam, it could be that people are stopped from going into places like bars, sporting events, that sort of thing?
Yeah, in fact, there are two things that have happened in Germany today, two big announcements. And if we unpick them, one is about exactly as you were just saying, effectively a lockdown for the unvaccinated. Now, this could actually come into play pretty shortly. And this would see people who have effectively chosen not to take the vaccine being barred from essential shops, being barred from leisure and culture facilities, while their friends and relatives who have been vaccinated are allowed into those shops. I don't think there's any way of presenting that as anything other than a two-tier society. Effectively, this is not so much a nudge to people to try to get them vaccinated as a massive wallop in the back. Now, critics will say that this is stigmatising to them. Supporters, I think, would probably agree, but I think there is some unease about the idea of telling people that they can't live the same life as others. I have to say there are plenty in German society who support that. Polls suggest that will get pretty popular support. The other thing that the Germans have announced today is the proposal for mandatory vaccination. It's a bit more complicated, this one. It would have to go through the German parliament, the Bundestag. It has the backing of Angela Merkel, Chancellor, at least the Chancellor now. She's about to leave that job. She says she would support that, even though in the past she said that this really has to be a voluntary process. But her successor, Olaf Scholz, also supports this. He's pretty much in charge now, and he said it will be a free vote in the Bundestag, but he thinks it is likely to go through. And I think this could have huge implications. Now, Austria has already said that it will follow this process of a mandatory vaccination. But to be blunt, there is one thing for Austria to do, quite another for Germany, the richest and most populous country in the European Union, a country that has been led for so long by Angela Merkel, a fairly cautious leader, now by Olaf Scholz, somebody who is also not given to these big bits of theatre that you get from, let's say, Emmanuel Macron or Boris Johnson, that neither of those people would have wanted to do this, to bring in mandatory vaccinations, or indeed this two-tier form of society. It tells you a lot about Germany's problems that they aren't prepared to embrace this. What are those problems? Big surge in cases recently, largely in the east of Germany. And Germany is not alone. We're seeing similar rises in cases in other countries. France, which has done pretty well until recently, has seen a spike over the past few days. Jean Castex, the Prime Minister there, has called a meeting of his Health Defence Council for Monday. There are plenty of changes around Europe at the moment. It is a patchwork of slightly different rules from country to country. But one thing that everyone will be watching is what happens in Germany.
OK, Adam, many thanks. Well, it's been a busy day of news about Omicron. Let's try and unpick some of it. As promised, we've got a panel of experts tonight. I'm joined by the Professor of Paediatrics at the University of Bristol and member of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, Adam Finn, Senior Clinical Lecturer at Exeter University and Public Health Expert, Dr Bharat Pankhania, and the GP, Dr Rosemary Leonard. Great to see you all this evening. Thank you very much for giving us your time and trying to answer some of the questions that we've had through to us at Sky News today. Let's crack on with those questions, shall we? Perhaps starting with you, Professor Finn. This question from Julia Bolston. Now, Julia says, as a mother of a 20-month-old, how worried should I be about Omicron? What do scientists and doctors say about the effects of the new variant on young children?
Well, of course, we're still only just learning about Omicron at the moment, but I think I can be very reassuring to Julia on this question, because one of the things that we've seen consistently through this pandemic is that children are much more mildly affected than adults, and very much more mildly affected than elderly adults by this virus. And the younger the children are, the less likely they are to get seriously ill. So it would be a very big surprise to see that trend change with this new variant. And we've certainly not heard any reports of serious illness in children from South Africa so far, nor seen any in Europe.
Yeah, it's good news, isn't it? Let's hope that continues. And just staying with you, Professor Finn, how long do you think before vaccines are brought in the UK for young children, not 20-month-old children, obviously, but 5-year-olds and above?
So we're expecting a verdict from the MHRA as to whether or not the younger children, whether the vaccine can be authorised for younger children. And as soon as that comes through, it'll be being discussed by the JCVI. So a decision on that should be expected certainly before Christmas.
Yeah. Dr Leonard, it's very hard, isn't it, for parents? Because, of course, all parents want answers. They want to know what the best thing is for their children. But when they come and see you and ask questions like this, you simply don't have the answers yet.
No, but we do have some answers. As the professor said, we know that in very young children and in school-age children, serious illness from COVID is extremely rare. So I think parents can be reassured about that. We have parents who are worried about side effects from the vaccine, and I look forward to hearing the recommendation of the JCVI as to whether the risk of the disease of COVID is greater than actually any risk of the vaccine. It's going to be a very finely judged decision, but I think parents can be reassured that actually this isn't, the vast majority of children, this is not a serious illness.
OK, let's move on to another question, and this is sort of looking ahead, really. And Dr Pankhania, perhaps you can help us with this one. It's from Dean in Slough, and Dean asks, what advice would you give to the government to try and avoid more problematic variants that could arise in the future, so even beyond Omicron?
So what we have to know is the natural history of viruses. And it isn't advised to the government, but it is advised to all governments. And whilst you can get a random mutation, you must read it as a mistake, which then becomes favorable to the virus and it becomes a new variant. That can happen at any place, anywhere, anytime in the world. Having said that, the probabilities of having variants emerge are under the following circumstances, where you have a lot of infections, where you have a prolonged infection, where you have a prolonged infection in somebody who is immune suppressed, and where you have those prolonged infections in an immune suppressed person that mistake upon mistake upon mistake, meaning mutation, in a person who's generating several generations of the virus, can lead to the emergence of a variant. So what should we be doing? This is a global issue, and the global issue, and especially with the richer nations, is this: we are not well until all of us are well, and we have failed in this task of immunizing ourselves, as well as helping Africa and other parts of the world to also suppress their infections. So the answer to Dean in Slough is, we, all the nations, especially the richer nations, with the WHO, need to work harder, a lot harder, and suppress infections globally. And if we suppress infections globally, we reduce the chances of such variants arising again.
Yeah, and just staying with you, what do you make of this news that we've just heard coming out of South Africa, that there is a substantial risk of immune evasion with Omicron? Reinfection rates seem to be twice as high as the original Wuhan strain.
So it is of much concern if it is vaccine bypassing. In other words, the antibodies made by our vaccines are not able to latch on to the virus and neutralize it. So it is of concern. However, what I want to say is it won't be a 100% vaccine escape. That is highly, highly unlikely. So marginally, the efficacy may drop by, say, 10, 15, 20%, but you are still protected by the existing vaccines. And the booster will be giving you an additional enhanced immunity. Furthermore, your T cells will also be being boosted. So at the moment, the best thing you can do is be fully immunized, including your booster, and take other infection control measures. And if we have to reformulate the vaccines, we can reformulate them, but we only reformulate them if it is absolutely necessary.
Okay. Dr. Leonard, this is a tricky one for experts such as yourselves to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it's something that so many people are thinking about. When is South Africa likely to be removed from the red list for UK citizens who've booked to see family this Christmas? Should we cancel our flights? That coming from Madeline. Once again, just as we thought travel was resuming, returning to normal, it's all in disarray again.
Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately, this is impossible for me to answer. It will only be possible to know when travel will be freed up again, actually, not only South Africa, but across Europe, when we know just the effects of this variant, just how is it more infectious? Does it cause more serious disease? And unfortunately, at the moment, it's a question of we've got to be patient. We've got to wait for the scientists to do their work. And we can't try and jump the gun and say, oh, yes, it will suddenly be freed up. We just don't know. We've got to be patient. And I know people don't like living with the unknown, but that's what we've got to do right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's the message, isn't it, that we're hearing over and over again. It's a sort of a watch and wait scenario. Adam Finn, the UN Secretary-General today, it was quite interesting, I thought, said that restrictions isolating individual countries are ineffective and even went as far as saying it's travel apartheid. Many would say surely a much better system of testing, being absolutely rigorous with that, would be better than the situation we've got at the moment, where countries are sort of randomly being picked and told, no, we don't want anyone coming.
Well, there is a certain randomness to this in a way. I certainly think that colleagues in South Africa have helped us a great deal by giving us information very promptly about this variant, which almost certainly didn't originate in South Africa, but it was their vigilance that brought it to the world's attention. And I suspect that it's quite widely distributed around the world, and the more testing is done, the more we'll find of it. So, yes, on the other hand, I can see why travel restrictions are being brought in simply because of the experience at the beginning of the pandemic when we saw such rapid propagation of the virus around the world. And people wish that they'd been quicker to restrict that from happening at the beginning. But you're right that an effective way of testing and tracing and trying to reduce transmission is the ideal approach to this. And that's clearly what we're trying to do in this country at the moment.
Yeah, because of course we all know the huge economic impact that shutting off international travel can have. Thank you all for the moment. Do stay with us. We're going to take a break in a moment, but plenty more questions to come. We can take a look now at some of the latest COVID data for you. Let's bring that in and show you the latest numbers. It shows that 53,945 new cases of COVID-19 have been recorded in the latest 24-hour period. A further 141 people have also died. This brings the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test to 145,281. 26,028 people received their first dose of a vaccine, while 32,356 people received their second dose, and that brings the total number of people to have received their second dose to more than 46.4 million, and 407,851 booster and third jabs were given in the latest 24-hour period, including the Prime Minister, of course, taking the total number of those doses to just over 19 million. The nationwide infection rate now stands at 436 weekly cases per 100,000 people, virtually unchanged, in fact, from the previous week. The place with the highest case rate is Torridge in Devon, with 1,049 cases per 100,000 people. Aside from the Scottish Islands, the place with the lowest rate is Ceredigion in Wales, with 220 cases per 100,000 people. I will do stay with us for this special Omicron question and answer special. Coming up after this short break, our panel will be staying with us to answer more of your questions. Don't go away.
It's something that's been going on since 1876, Kay. The grey squirrels brought the vaccine, brought the virus into the country, and then it's just been ripping through the red squirrel population for about 150 years. So from a population of about 3 million red squirrels, we're now down to about 120,000, and the situation is just getting worse. There are grey squirrels, but there's a lot of protection. It's a National Trust site, so they've got rangers going around trapping the greys. Having said that, the virus has been in there, but they've managed to control the greys again. The population slowly built up. We believe because there's about 3 million grey squirrels, the chances of controlling their numbers in the short term are very slim. So the best way to protect the red squirrels is to develop a vaccine against the virus. You can have grey squirrels living in contact with red squirrels, but in time, the red squirrels will disappear. But if those grey squirrels have got the virus, the red squirrels disappear 25 times more quickly. So unless we can get a vaccine into the red squirrels, they're going to continue to die in agony, as long as the grey squirrels are around. We're trying to raise £1.2 million, and we believe that will actually get the vaccine out into the field.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
ba ma dalee commencé liggéey bi yokkute bu bari am nañ ko ci.
Hello again, welcome back to Sky News Tonight. We're answering your questions about the Omicron variant, and I'm joined by the Professor of Paediatrics at the University of Bristol and member of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, Adam Finn, Senior Clinical Lecturer at Exeter University and Public Health Expert, Dr Bharat Pankhania, and also the GP, Dr Rosemary Leonard. Great to see you all again. Dr Leonard, why don't we start part two with you? I'm sure you've been asked this question a number of times. Jeanette Griffiths has been in touch to say, what extra precautions do the panel advise the clinically vulnerable take when it comes to the new variant?
The answer is carry on doing what you're doing now. We don't know if this new variant is any more dangerous to the clinically vulnerable than the Delta variant. Certainly, clinically vulnerable people should absolutely make sure they are fully vaccinated. Many of the really vulnerable people should have had 3 vaccines as their primary course. And then we think the advice after that hasn't really been clarified, but they will probably then need a 4th dose, maybe a 5th dose. Best thing to do is to ask their own individual doctors. And also with Christmas coming, just to have a think about how much you want to intermingle with other people. And if you've got a family gathering round, maybe it would be sensible for the other family members to do lateral flow tests before they visit those who are clinically vulnerable, to keep the risk of transmission of the virus to those at risk as low as possible.
Rosemary, is your surgery having a Christmas party this year?
We are indeed. We are. We didn't have one last year. We've all been working closely together, but we are hiring quite a big space. We don't envisage us hugging each other. There certainly won't be any mistletoe. We won't be. I mean, there's been a lot in the news today about mistletoe, and we won't be having any.
No. OK. And of course, we're all being told now that we need to wear masks. Adam, where is the evidence on wearing masks now? Because it's caused quite a bit of a row, hasn't it, in recent days? Some people saying that the evidence simply isn't there, and why should their freedoms be impinged on? What do you say?
Well, I'm fortunate in having a very distinguished colleague who researches aerosols here in Bristol, Jonathan Reed, and he's shared the latest evidence with us recently. It's very, very clear that wearing a mask will reduce the chances of you infecting other people when you have this and indeed other respiratory viruses, of which there are a lot around at the moment. So you can reduce the risks to people around you by wearing a mask. If you wear the kind of mask that we use in hospital, the FFP2s, you can actually protect yourself because you can seal the mask around your nose and mouth, and you can filter out some of the droplets that are in the air. But wearing a mask, any kind of mask, will reduce the chances of you infecting people around you. And I think there's really no question about that.
OK. Dr Pankhania, question for you. This is an interesting one from Thiru. Do we know the vaccine status of the people who have contracted Omicron in the UK? We know more cases have been announced this evening, but do we know whether or not they were vaccinated?
If you had asked me that question tomorrow, I would have said, I know the answer because I've got an incident meeting tomorrow. Having said that, looking at the evidence from other parts of the world, we do know, especially from South Africa, that people who have been fully immunized have got infected with the Omicron variant. That's nothing unusual because you can be fully immunized and get infected. So we don't know. We don't know for the UK people, but the message is, of course, you can get infected even if you have been fully immunized.
Yeah, it's interesting, the debate, Dr Leonard, isn't it, about mandatory vaccines, something which may well come in Germany and elsewhere. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we're already seeing it, that those who are working in the NHS and in social care by next April, they must be fully vaccinated. And I know people see this as a sort of a violation of their human rights, if you like, but I think we will be seeing, we're in a time of war, we're in a time of a biological war. And that comes when we have to say what is the best for society. And some of our rights do seem to go away. We have to accept there are sacrifices we have to make. And I think we will be seeing in the UK more and more employers particularly insisting that their workforce is vaccinated to protect the others around them as much as anything else. I mean, I speak to a lot of people who haven't been vaccinated and they say, well, it doesn't matter to me, I'm willing to take that chance. The problem is if they're working with other people who are more vulnerable and they spread the virus to them. So yes, there are a lot of ethical questions about it, but I can see us moving more in the direction of other European countries and insisting more on vaccination.
OK, I know we've got to say goodbye to you. You've got to dash off. Dr Rosemary Leonard, GP in West Dulwich in London, thank you very much indeed. Dr Pankhania, I saw you shaking your head there. What are your thoughts on this?
So look, I've been in the business for 30 years, immunizing children, and I know all about the MMR debacle that we had and how worried mothers were with taking the vaccine or not taking it. And I tell you, I have done this for over 30 years. I spoke to my patients, I educated them, I informed them, I told them about the pluses and minuses of the vaccines, and I took them with me. I have a long track record of taking most of my patients with me. I feel very disturbed about forcing people to have vaccines because this is a long-term thing. I don't want to alienate my patients. I don't want to alienate people. I want them to be informed and I want them to make those choices voluntarily. I think it is a failure. It's a failure of politicians, health officers, people like myself in public health of informing, advising, educating people about the benefits of the vaccine, and we should do that first before we mandate it.
Very interesting. OK, thank you very much for that. One final question. I'll direct this at Professor Adam Finn. We've touched on Christmas parties already, but of course, as we approach Christmas, it is a question many people are asking, isn't it? Including Shrelane, who says, should large gatherings like Christmas parties be cancelled? It's risking vulnerable people in our families.
This is a tricky one to answer. Of course, we're hearing mixed messages from different advisors on this. I can give you my personal view, and that is that I will not be going to any Christmas parties this year. I've got a lot of people who work with me, and I very much like their company, and I like to celebrate the end of the year. But I think with the prospect of another wave as a very real potential problem coming up, we should all be doing absolutely everything we can to minimize transmission, both of the Delta variant that we've got at the moment and potentially this new Omicron variant. So the more you can do to reduce transmission over the next few weeks, the better. And I think Christmas parties is one of those things that we can probably manage without.
OK, very interesting. Dr Pankhania nodding his head as well. We must leave it there, but it's been great getting your thoughts and getting your answers to our viewers' questions. Adam Finn, Professor of Paediatrics at the University of Bristol, Dr Bharat Pankhania, Senior Clinical Lecturer at Exeter University, and Dr Rosemary Leonard, who left a little earlier. Thank you both very much indeed. Really good to get your thoughts this evening. So there we are. Very interesting indeed. Plenty more coming up here on Sky News tonight, including we've been given exclusive access to an emergency department as staff struggle to manage the backlog of patients caused by the pandemic. That's in a couple of minutes.